You know what I got the other day, Pete? Stephen King's latest. Want to borrow it?
Do you know who you're talking to?
What do you mean?
Andy, when's the last time I read a paper book? It's been decades. I would much rather use Kindle, or better yet, Audible.
What am I thinking? I don't read paper books anymore either. I'm an audiobook guy all the way. For those looking to listen to the books behind the films that we talk about here on Movies We Like, not to mention all the other podcasts in the Next Reel family, get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at thenextreel.com/audible.
There are so many great adaptations from movies we like available in audio form.
Early on, we covered Casino Royale with director Matthew Gratzner. You went through all of the 007 books on Audible, right?
I did indeed. What a series. We also covered Room with legendary Dee Wallace and Never Let Me Go with costume designer Alana Moorehead.
We chatted about Fat City with cinematographer Sam Levy and Silver Linings Playbook with the great composer Harry Gregson Williams.
101 Dalmatians and Bambi.
Apocalypse Now, There Will Be Blood, The Thin Red Line.
There's so many great adaptations with so many great guests, and you can get all these as audiobooks on Audible, along with thousands of other great reads.
Producing this podcast is a lot of fun, but it does take a lot of time. We have already dropped the dynamically inserted ads because they are so annoying and have no connection to our content.
Plus, they just jam those things in wherever they see fit.
We listened when you said you didn't like them. So now, we're directly appealing to you, our dear listener. Please consider an Audible subscription to help support Movies We Like and the Next Reel's family of podcasts.
I've been using Audible along with my family for decades now. I love it, and I've read hundreds of books through it. Couldn't be more pleased with their service, and I know you'll love it too. Head to thenextreel.com/audible and get your free trial. It really helps us out. And you have a world of over 200,000 audiobooks open to you.
So much great material available. Dive in with a free trial and get your first free audiobook at thenextreel.com/audible.
Start listening to amazing audiobooks of your favorite movie source material with your first free audiobook today. That's thenextreel.com/audible. Andy, I know you've never been happier than when you're sitting by a warm fire, snuggled up in a flannel and basking in the glow of an old-school budget spreadsheet.
It is a special day I can shut down the world for a little me time.
In a world full of applications, why do these antiquated documents and spreadsheets still run the world? And why haven't they been updated in over 50 years? That's why we want to talk about Coda.
Coda is a new kind of doc that brings words, data, and teams together. It comes with a set of building blocks that anyone can combine to create a doc as powerful as an app.
Coda runs our entire business here at True Story FM, from show scheduling across dozens of podcasts and scripts for thousands of episodes, to budgets and plans and wikis and more.
Coda lets us see our business in a new light. If you'd like to shine a light on productivity in your business and save money along the way, check out Coda today at thenextreel.com/Coda. Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
Hello, Andy Nelson.
On today's episode, we have invited special effects supervisor Chris Reynolds to talk about Giuseppe Tornatore's Cinema Paradiso, a movie he likes. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you.
What an extraordinarily great counter-programming pick you have brought us, given your role in cinema, Chris.
Yes. I mean, I've always sort of, funny enough, been drawn to the more love story type films as my own favourite films, and not, as you would imagine, the sort of big action epics with lots of special effects in.
Isn't that funny?
Maybe I've just headed down the wrong career path. Maybe I should have been a cinematographer or something like that. We are where we are.
Exactly.
We are where we are.
I've spent a living blowing things up and making a big mess, basically, and lots of rain, and not making the love stories, the films that I prefer.
Well, some could argue love stories are plenty messy on their own, right? There's a lot of mess that people have to go through with those.
Yes.
Well, before we start digging into Cinema Paradiso and talk about that film, let's talk a little bit about you and your career. You know, special effects is, I think, such a fun an easy way for people to kind of, especially like, I don't know, me, young men to kind of fall in love with film because of kind of all the things that they're seeing on screen. You know, what was it when you were young, like what was it that kind of captured your eye about special effects? Like, do you remember like when you first started noticing it as something that people were doing?
I left school when I was 16 and I started working in engineering. And I don't really remember too much being sort of too involved in thinking I would end in a sort of film, working in the business I'm working in now. I had an uncle who worked on Thunderbirds, and he used to come back with stories about that. So that was part of sort of my early life. But really, I was involved in engineering. But I remember what happened when I went to university later in life. I went to university when I was about 20. And a friend of mine said to me late one night, "Oh, should we go and see a film down at the local cinema?" And I said, well, "Yeah, I don't mind, but this is like midnight." And apparently it turned out this film was 4 hours long, and it was Dr. Zhivago. And I remember coming out of this film thinking, "Oh my God, if I can be a part of telling a story like that and in contributing to people's enjoyment, that is sort of something I would love to do." So even though I was doing architecture at university, the seed had been sown in my mind for an alternative career, even at that stage. And so when I finished my course, I then managed to get a job working in commercials through a friend of mine, doing special effects in commercials, because the one thing I was always good at was making things and innovative engineering, which is what special effects is.
Sure.
Really.
Yeah.
So I worked in commercials for about a year, and then I was lucky enough to get a job at the BBC, and I was at the BBC for 20 years. It was a terrific learning ground for everything. I mean, they just literally threw you in at the deep end. And ever sculpted anything before? No. Right, okay, sculpt up a 4-foot set of lips then using all this clay. So it was that type of thing, and yeah. So you literally were thrown in the deep end, which is great because it's a terrific way of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember some of the specific? I mean, obviously, you just talked about a big set of lips, but other sorts of interesting requests that you had as an early special effects.
Well, at the BBC, there was just like mad things coming through on a daily basis, from exploding haggises to. I worked on the Blackadders, which are still quite well known today. And I made the green, the famous green that he's sort of supposed to have invented, and like he's supposed to try to make gold, but he doesn't. He makes a big green splat instead. And so, in the story terms of like Blackadder and things, it's quite well known. So I had a hand in making that, and doors that Rowan Atkinson was thrown through as Blackadder. I worked on a low with all sorts of funny. Bells that dropped over people's heads, giant bells that were dropped over people's heads, and then the classic sort of like machine gun hits and anything like that. So it was a great place to sort of, because you just literally didn't know what you were doing next. On a Monday and Tuesday, you'd be working on All Creatures Great and Small up in Yorkshire with horses crashing through gates, and then you'd be off to Television Centre to do Top of the Pops on the sort of Wednesday, Thursday, and then you'd be back on sort of like something else on like a Lenny Henry show, which is a comedy program, on a Friday. So,
oh my gosh,
yeah, there's a very varied 20 years.
What a variety!
Yeah, that's incredible, and that it ends at some point with a punctuation of a nugget of purest green. Like that is just a fantastic story.
Yeah. It was made out of car body filler.
No kidding. That's awesome.
I wish I'd kept it. It would probably be worth a lot of money now.
Yeah, for sure.
No kidding. Now, obviously, one of the key things in the world of effects, I mean, not all effects, but one of the key things that people are always so careful with is safety, and doing it in a safe way. Obviously, you can blow things up and just blow it up, but then the whole idea of going into effects in a way where people can be interacting with it in a safe way, like, I mean, that's such a critical part of this whole process. I mean, is that kind of a whole other sort of learning curve in figuring out, okay, we can blow this up, but what elements do we need to do to incorporate into that to make sure that it's safe?
Well, everything needs to be planned, really. I mean, we've just been working on a Disney job. A lot of the things that we do nowadays are the HETV, high-end TV work. And this tells the story of the Price sisters. It's set in the 1970s in the IRA period, the rise of the IRA. So it's the troubles in Northern Ireland. And we've had various shoot-ups on that. And one particular shoot-up was in a paint factory. So it all needs to be planned out how you do it, really. So you figure that the artist is standing here and therefore these tins of paint need to be done on air because it's an air system where you're just literally blowing, using compressed air, paint into the air. You can get artists relatively close to that, but anything where you've got sparks or bits of more heavyweight debris need to be pushed further away from artists or stunts. So, I mean, stunts, you can get closer to some of that stuff, but artists, you have to be so careful about what's around them. And it offers its challenges. But of course, no shoot-up scene is ever the same. There's one may be in a warehouse and one may be in a paint factory and one may be on the street. So
plus what they're wearing, obviously, that factors into it.
Yeah. And that is the brilliant thing about our whole business, really, that, I mean, I've been doing this 40 years now, and virtually every single day is different. I mean, that's what's lovely. You've got unique challenges all the same, all the time. I mean, a rain sequence in the centre of London is different from a rain sequence up in the Highlands of Scotland.
And yet, over 40 years, like, what is the effect that you think about over your career in those early days that you think, I was ridiculous for having been involved in a stunt like that way back then? Like, we would never do that. We were stupid and we got lucky.
In terms of danger-wise, sometimes there's been a few things. I remember I did a First World War battlefield thing, and because you're learning the whole time.
Yeah.
And it was involved there was about 40 or 50 people walking across a field with big explosions going off all over the place. I mean, we'd labelled where all the explosions were, and we told everybody to avoid where they all were. I remember watching it as we were doing it and just seeing one of the artists jump right over the top, or one of the background artists jump right over the top of one of the explosions, and thinking, you just can't rely on people's own sense to not do something as stupid as that. And yeah, we did get lucky that the explosion didn't go off. And we did have an element where we could see all the explosions, but there were sometimes it wasn't like 100% that you could see, because when you're looking along a field, it's difficult to get perspective of where people are. You sort of need to be up high. And even though we were on a scaffold tower, it wasn't quite high enough to see with 100% safety where everybody was. But it's things like that you learn, really. I mean, and you learn that actually explosions on water, you can get virtually no perspective on explosions on water. So you think the explosion is here, but actually it's probably a lot further away, or it's a lot closer to you, because there's just no reference to it. But it's a learning curve all the time. It's a learning curve. But you have to balance the learning with what's safe. And if it gets to a point where you're not quite sure about it, it's better to not do it at all. And that sometimes does happen. I mean, I still find now that I say, no, we're not doing this. We're not being rushed into this, or we're not doing it like this. We'll do it, but we need to take our time and do it properly, rather than try and rush it at the end of the day, which all too often happens with special effects sequences.
And that's actually an interesting point, shifting into kind of like the way that effects are handled now. I'm not sure if the state of unions, as far as like over here in the US versus over there in the UK, as far as like the world of effects, if they have unions over there or not. But I know over here, that's kind of a big conversation in the realm of all the, especially this year with the various conversations about unions and the idea that the people working on effects don't have a union, and like they're overworked, and it's so much that they're being asked to do. I mean, how much does that play into it? And do you feel like things need to be changing?
Well, the unions in the UK are not as strong as they are in the US. Having said that, there are agreements between producers and crew, really, about amount of hours that are worked and those sort of things. Safety is set in place in terms of like workshop crew do 1 hour less a day than shoot crew, because it's deemed that their work is more dangerous and that they're working all the time. Whereas on a shoot, quite often there's periods where you're standing around waiting for somebody to set something up. Ultimately, it comes down to the heads of department like myself to say, listen, we've been working too much. This is dangerous now. I need to either get more crew in to cover for this, or we need to stop and have a break. for a bit because we can't keep doing this. I mean, there's a balance to it all because sometimes when you're doing smoke and just general smoke and bits and pieces like that, it's not quite so bad. But even on a rain sequence, there's an element of if you get it wrong, something can fall over and hit somebody. So, and there's a danger element to that as well. And that's not even including the explosive pyrotechnic side of it, which obviously needs to be strictly monitored and given time and rehearsal time particularly.
Earlier on in your career, obviously you were starting as a beginner. You kind of worked more as a technician, and then kind of a senior technician. And now you've kind of worked up into the title of special effects supervisor. In that kind of shift of kind of coming to a place where you're now kind of overseeing all of these different people involved, and oftentimes there's the teams on set working. There are also all of these other special effects companies that kind of are hired for, you're going to do this particular thing, you're going to do that particular thing. Some people are doing stuff that there's an element on set, but a lot of it ends up getting done in post. As the supervisor, like juggling all of those different things, I mean, at what point do you start having these conversations in the process of a project, and kind of how do you find that you're like managing all of that to make sure that for the director and the filmmakers that the vision that they have is able to be told in the best way?
I mean, sometimes with the special effects side of it, some of it is very simple. Some jobs are very simple. Other jobs need a lot of talking about, really, because there's such a crossover now between who's doing what, where and when. So, I mean, what we tend to do is we tend to have a meeting which is a page turn, and we just literally go through an effect sequence, and we page turn on the effect sequence and go, okay, right, so the chocolate spewing out of this person's ear, how are we going to do this? Is this like real, or is this going to be done as a visual effects, or how are we going to do it? And it's basically a matter of talking about it. And sometimes the director will go, well, I'd like to do something for real. Can we do something for real? And how are you going to do that, Chris? And then I have to come up with a way how we're going to get chocolate to spew out of somebody's ear.
I like that's where you go to, chocolate out of the ear.
And some jobs there's a lot of, some jobs there'll be literally the chocolate spew out of somebody's ear, then something else happens and something else happens, and you have to go through a sequence and just figure out exactly what's happening and who's providing what. And there's a big crossover between visual effects, art department, director, first assistant, and ourselves to figure out, and stunts quite often as well in the big action sequences, to figure out what everybody needs from each other. And that's the exciting thing in many ways. I always say to people, this business is a bit like working in the army, really, that lots of departments all coming together for a common cause. In many ways, you're not working in an environment that's particularly friendly to where you are, because you may be working in North Wales, which is pretty remote and there's not that much there, or you could be working in Morocco, where there's in the far extremes of Morocco where there's nothing at all. So you have to be quite resourceful sometimes, and that's exciting. It's got it's interesting by itself.
Do you find? I mean, I'm looking at your website, looking at the stuff that you've done. It feels like you have such a wide variety of effects work that you've done. Do you have something that makes you just really light up when you get a project that comes across your desk? You thinking, God, it's mechanical effects, or it's pyrotechnics, or it's atmospherics. Like, what really lights you up when you get a new project? You think I'm working on a particular set of effects that gets me out of bed in the morning.
I think I like all of it. And I like the variety of it. Like, sometimes I won't have done a shoot-up sequence for 2 years, and then I'll end up with 3 or 4, one after another. And then I'll end up doing a few big rain jobs and a big smoke job, and sometimes we get snow. That's another thing we do in the UK as well. I mean, so I think there's no one particular thing. It's the variety of the whole area of what I work in is what I really like to do. I think, in all honesty, probably some of the most interesting jobs I've done have been jobs involving like battlefield sequences. I worked on a job called Centurion, where there was a lot of fighting in that film, and there was bigger crossovers with visual effects, figuring out who's doing what and what's happening here, and all those particular things. So And that was where it involved exactly what I was just telling you, a page turn. I think that particular meeting was called Killings and Stabbings meeting. And we just went through about who was being killed and who was being stabbed and what they were being stabbed with or having their head chopped off with. And did we need a rubber axe? Did we need an axe with a cutout of it? And it's going through all those sorts of things, really. And that's it's quite amusing, really, when you sit down like 7 or 8 hours and go through a whole script as something like Centurion, and there's a lot of special effects in that.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Those department meetings are always interesting because of the amount of overlap in all of the different departments. Like, obviously, some of the effects that you want to do affects, okay, well, for the costume department, that means we need to have how many extras of this particular outfit, and just all of those different things that people have to discuss, not just in terms of budget, but also in schedule, because you're going to have to change the actor after every take and stuff like that.
Well, that's an important thing as well. Yeah. I mean, how long is it going to take to change the actor? How long will it take to put the costume on the actor that has the squibs in it in his chest when he's being shot with a shotgun here? So, I mean, I had that conversation about a week ago about a job that's starting in February. So,
Chris, how often do you look at your own IMDb page?
Oh, I can't remember the last time I looked at it.
That's good. That's what I wanted to hear. One of the things that we find absolutely wonderfully mysterious about IMDb is, you have the page, you have your little profile, and then below that, the algorithm of IMDb has determined what you should be known for as a professional.
That's crazy. I know.
And I don't think we've ever done this. We play a game called the IMDb game around these parts, where we will ask as a form of trivia, can you guess the top 4 that this performer or professional should be known for? We've never done it with someone on this show. And I want to know if you can guess what the algorithm believes you should be known for, Chris Reynolds. You get 4.
Oh, dear. Is it Sherlock Holmes is up there somewhere?
It is not.
Oh, dear. Pride, Prejudice and Zombies? No.
Should be, is not.
The World's End. The World's End must be there somewhere.
Yes, The World's End. You got 1.
Oh, The Crown. Is The Crown there?
No, can you believe it? 50 episodes.
Considering how much you've worked on that, yeah.
I mean, look how massive The Crown is at the moment.
I know.
And yeah, I would have thought that would probably be the top at the moment.
So far, you're 1 for 3, and you've gotten your 4 guesses, or 1 and 3. You've got your 4 guesses. I'm going to tell you what it thinks you should be known for. Your 2 episodes when Jack Ryan goes to London in Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan.
Right. Okay.
The Conjuring 2.
The Conjuring. Oh yeah, The Conjuring was a good film actually.
Yeah. And
that's a fun one.
And The Nevers. 6 episodes you did on The Nevers.
Right. Okay.
Did those surprise you?
I can't believe The Nevers. Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
It's always a guessing game with that.
It's a mystery, some of these things.
It really is.
It
is one of our very favorite movies around these parties, The World's End, though, the Edgar Wright, the work he did with Edgar Wright.
Yeah, it was a good film, that one was. It came out well in the end.
Yeah, I think it did. Do you have any? I mean, I'd spent
I did 71 as well. Have you seen, I would have thought 71 might be up there. Have you ever seen 71?
No.
It's a really good film. Another film about the IRA, funny enough, about the Troubles, set in the Troubles. It was made on a pretty low budget, but it's actually a very good film. And there was a lot of special effects on it with burning cars and all sorts of things happening. It tells the story of a young British soldier who gets caught in a riot, behind the lines in a riot, and he tries to escape. He's being chased by members of the IRA, and it's about his story trying to get back to the lines and then seeing some pretty underhanded things that the British Special Services were doing over there as well. It's a really interesting film. It's a good film.
Looks interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out.
Definitely get that on the watch list.
It's definitely worth a watch. Definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, kind of speaks to, in our having a kind of a conversation with you before we started, you talked about some of your favorites that kind of inspired you in this world, things like Battle of Britain and
Battle of Waterloo and things like that.
Yeah. Obviously, like, these are films that it's all about war, and so by nature of the film, it's just like in Battle of Britain. I mean, so much of that is flying around and all of the dogfights that they're having, and just all of the different explosions, on the ground as planes are flying over.
Amazing battle sequences in it as well, of course.
Yeah.
Visual effects didn't exist, so everything had to be done physically.
Yeah, I watched it last night. I wish I had a better copy to watch, so it wasn't very clean. So I couldn't really tell, like in a lot of the flying sequences, or like, am I looking at models or are these? I mean, oftentimes you can tell when it's real planes, but when some of the specific explosions in the sky and stuff.
Yeah, the crashing sequences and crashing in the sea and things like that. I mean, it's actually quite difficult to tell. I've played some of those clips a dozen times, and eventually I thought that's definitely a model, but it is, some of it still stands a good test of time,
Oh
really.
yeah, it really does. I mean, just solid work. When you would watch stuff like that, like I mean, I suppose there's kind of a especially now having worked in the business for so long, but I suppose there's like two different ways you can look at it. Is like one, like the way that the effects enhance the story and kind of do so much to kind of give the film exactly what they're trying to achieve. And then from your perspective, like what went into kind of coming up with that and creating that and like looking behind the scenes to see all those different pieces. Do you find yourself still kind of like with those two mindsets as you're watching effects, or have you been in the business so long that when you're watching effect sequences, you're just like, I can't get lost in the story anymore. I just see the effects.
No, I think I still watch the story.
Yeah.
But then there's every now and then there's a clip that I'll look at and go, that's clever. How did they do that? I mean, one that springs to mind in Battle of Britain is, of course, the Spitfire coming across the field on fire. And it comes across the field towards the camera, then blows up and then carries on fire. And I mean, I've played that several times, and I'm convinced that's a full-size mock-up of a Spitfire or a Hurricane. And it's all, because when you look at it on fire later, you can see it's been made out of bits of plywood and bits of ordinary, the way a set construction would have built it.
Yeah.
So in the early stages, before it actually explodes and catches light, it looks like a real aircraft. So I do look at things and think, yes, how did they do that? And not just old films. I mean, Fury, the film was out recently, is a great film for
The tank
special
battle film.
The explosions on the tanks are so terrific, and all the frenzy of war, the way it all cuts together. I think that's what makes it so good on that particular sequence with the tank battle, is the way the cutting together and the speed of the cutting, and then of course the special effects enhance it all as well.
Yeah, very much. And I think there's a lot of, I suppose, as kind of a person working in visual effects, when you're working on that sort of project, trying to make the effects realistic in the scope of the story that you're telling. World War II tanks, we want to make sure that everything feels realistic in this scope, maybe a little bigger than, it's okay to be a little bigger in the scope of, it's a movie, we're telling the story, want it to be exciting and everything still. But obviously that's a lot different than when you get to be a little more fantastical and you're dealing with dragons or aliens or things like that. And you get to kind of really change things up. Do you revel in kind of jumping into those sorts of stories because it does allow you to do something a little more outside the box, I suppose you could say?
I love it when it goes different, really. I mean, we did a thing for Sky a few years ago, which was Last Dragon Slayer and things like that. So that was quite a good. So there was like dragon flames bursts and all those sorts of things, and then about 4 years ago I did a thing called Electric Dreams, which is another HETV type of thing. It's a whole load of series. It was a series of short stories, because Blade Runner was actually a short story, and it was and it was one of a group of about 25 short stories, and Electric Dreams tried to start telling all that group of 25 or so short stories, but I think we only got as far as telling the first 6.
This was an Amazon thing, right?
Yeah, it may have been Amazon. I think it was I think when we did it, it was a sort of
Sky.
thing.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Amazon. Oh no, it was Amazon. That was it. Yeah, that was a really exciting thing to work on, because I think we shot, each episode was 6 weeks to shoot it. So you were shooting one episode and then lining up for the next episode, and of course there was a lot of really unusual things happening in it all the time, because it was a very sort of supernatural, futuristic, crazy thing that was going on.
Yeah, I remember that one. It had an incredible cast. I don't think they're doing any. I think you're right. I don't think they're doing anything more with it.
No, they didn't do it anymore, which was a real shame, because I think that, like many times, it's such a pity when you do series, you do 6 episodes or something of what could possibly be 25 episode series, and then they just finish it after the first 6 because they're not super duper popular. But that quite often happens with a lot of series, really. Things are not always massively popular in the first series. And quite often it needs the second series to really get it geared in.
Right, for people to discover it. I mean, look at Black Mirror, right? Like, they had Electric Dreams had such a fantastic Black Mirror vibe, which was already popular, that it just felt like they gave up a bit too soon.
And just based on Philip K. Dick's shorts, like just the fact that
yes.
you were, I mean, I loved watching those. And I had so much fun with that series. And it was such a disappointment when it didn't keep going, because I'm like, there's so much more.
It was really good fun to work on. And it had some really nice cast and the crew, very talented art department who were joining out the different sets at short notice. And that was a really interesting thing to do. Interesting job.
Yeah, for sure. Before we jump into our conversation about Cinema Paradiso, I just want to gauge, we're as we record this, we're toward the end of 2023. What films from this past year stand out to you as like the films that really kind of set a high mark in the world of visual effects? Do you have any particular favorites that you've seen this year?
Not really, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I haven't seen Oppenheimer, I've got to say, sorry. And I haven't seen Barbie, which are two of the biggest films this year. I don't know what special effects are on Oppenheimer so far, and I haven't, because Napoleon has only just come out. I haven't had a chance to go and see it, but I will go and see that.
Gotcha.
Soon. So I can't really judge that one. But I would guess that's probably got some really good special effects in it. I mean, there's certainly...
Especially the sorts of effects that would light you up.
And it's filmed in the UK with there's a lot of technicians here, special effects technicians, which are really good. I'm not so sure who the special effects supervisor is on it. I think it might be Neil Kobold, in which case it'd be really good. So
yeah. I mean, Ridley Scott and battle scenes, put those two things together, inevitably you're going to have fantastic things to watch. So a lot of really great things to watch in that one.
I mean, I think like a lot of people now, I spend a lot of time watching stuff on all the streaming channels.
Yeah, so, yeah, right. Yeah, that's very true.
It's like most people do, really. So,
there's a glut of content. It's hard to choose these days.
Yeah, which is a good thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been watching the latest series of The Crown, which I think is really good. That's come out really well.
What sort of work were they asking you to do on The Crown?
Well, The Crown is, I mean, generally we've got a couple of people on it all the time, so it's a bit of haze, a bit of rain here and there, and then we get the odd thing which is different. Like in the last series, there's a whole load of tin cans where the two princes are shooting tin cans off of a wall. So we had to build a false wall top and with air rigs to blow tin cans in the air so that you could have artists at the same time delivering lines where there's aluminium tins flying around and quickly resettable as well. So, I mean, that was just one gag in the last series. There's probably several others, but there's a lot of, it keeps us fairly busy, even though it's not obvious what the special effects are in it, really.
Yeah, I see, like, there's a lot of that sort of, when you look at the lineup of projects that you've worked on, there's a lot of that probably, like, Victoria and Abdul. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's probably, like, weather effects somewhere in there, things like that, that really kind of ties in. But, and other stuff, too, but I just, like, there is a lot of, I think that's what's kind of so interesting about the world of visual effects, is, like, it's not just...
Special effects.
War of the Worlds and things, there's not just like the big aliens or wars. It's all of these little things.
Yeah, it covers everything from a bit of haze, rain, physical effects, mechanical rigs, sometimes really unusual mechanical rigs to do all sorts of bits and pieces.
Yeah, right.
Well, we should talk about all the unusual mechanical rigs in Cinema Paradiso, am I right?
In another time and another place, there was an enchanted village where the young and the young at heart shared their joys and dreams. Where a boy made mischief and a young man found romance. And an old friend shared his magic with the town he loved. Every Saturday night they came to share the fantasy. They came for the thrills and the chills, the passion, the laughter, and all the kisses you never saw. Cinema Paradiso. Winner Special Jury Prize, Cannes Film Festival.
Count on the visual effects supervisor to bring just something really bombastic to the show.
I'll tell you, the flame sequence in it, where the Alfredo is
Yes.
caught in a burning cinema, is not particularly well done. It doesn't spoil the film. The film is a brilliant, brilliant film.
Well, okay, so let's start there. What is it that drew you to this particular film? Do you remember?
I remember about 25 years ago or so, it was reviewed late night on one of the British sort of cinema film sort of review programs on BBC or something. And I didn't see it being reviewed, but I just remember them saying it was a good film. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, I was flicking through Amazon, I think it was, and I suddenly saw it come up. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll play that film. And I played it. And it's an amazing film. It's one of those films that's difficult to actually say straight away what the story is, because there's so many different bits to the story going through the whole film. On the one hand, it's a story about a successful film director who suddenly finds out late one night when he's in Rome that an old friend of his from his village where he grew up has died, and he then goes back in his mind and imagines when he was an 8 or 9 year old boy in the village in Sicily about his friendship and his love of the cinema with the local film projectionist, a guy called Alfredo. And it's Alfredo that you find out has died. The story goes through Toto, who is the young boy, and his story as he's growing up and his love of the cinema. Alfredo then has an accident in the projectionist booth, because Alfredo is the local cinema projectionist, and he's blind. And then Toto takes over the cinema projectionist job and runs it. And then it then leads into him having the love story of him and a local girl, and it mixes in with the local village life and all the scenery around the local village and all the characters in the village all going to the cinema, and all the films in the cinema. It's got some brilliant images in it and a great story running through it as well.
That's I think the thing that I find so kind of magical about it. I mean, it is really about this young kid and finding this passion at such a young age for cinema, and the joy of not just watching the movies, but really kind of like he's always been kind of, I mean, as a kid interested in the behind the scenes, but in the world of the village, that really means the projectionist and the booth and the idea of like cutting scenes out when the priest doesn't want certain scenes included and all of that sort of stuff.
That of course, is quite an important part of the story.
Yeah.
But you never really find that out until the end.
Exactly. Right.
That the priest has the scenes cut out, the kissing scenes cut out
right.
Of the films, because he doesn't think that the villagers should be watching these films with kissing scenes in them.
Right. Too pornographic. Yeah.
Too pornographic. Yeah. And then, of course, as the film goes on, that's almost the final ending of the film, is where you suddenly, Alfredo's widow gives Toto an old film reel, which he then plays, and in it is all those kissing clips played over them with the music of Morricone's amazing music over it all, which is just like, it's probably one of the best film endings ever.
And such a celebration of not just cinema, but just like, it's all clips of like passion and love. And so it really becomes like this love for the passion, really. And that's, I think, what makes that final, watching that final montage just so magical, because it really kind of celebrates that.
And the other bit I liked about it as well is because during most of the early part of the film, because apart from the very opening sequence, Toto is a poor a boy whose father was killed in the war, and his mother's struggling to bring him up. And it's about him finding an escapism, which was the cinema in the local village. But then right at the end, when that clip is played at the end, you see Toto going into the film production company in Rome and handing the film to a projectionist, asking him to play it, and people coming up to him and going, "Oh, your new film is wonderful. It's been we're really everybody's pleased with your new film. We want to release it early and everything." And he's sort of semi-dismissive because he wants to go and walks down the corridor to go and see the film being played in the projection in the screening theatre. So, and then you see that he's successful, and it's just like, wow, he's successful. He showed everybody. That's a wonderful thing as well. I mean, it's a poor boy comes good. That's
right.
So there's so many aspects to the stories in the film.
You know what I think I found watching it last night that hit me for the first time in a long time is that it's not just about love of film. It's about love of mechanical film. And I think that dates the movie really positively for me, that the nostalgia trip is these guys love touching film. Right. They love touching and cutting. And that to me is like that visceral satisfaction of watching them turn the knobs and open and shut and re-spool the film and all of those things. Him sitting in front of the candle in his house, like, looking at each of the frames that were cut.
There's some lovely bits of cinematography in it as well, with just bits like where he's looking at the film in front of the candle. He can't even afford oil lamps or anything. He has they have a candle.
And then the sequence, as they realize what a gift film is to the community, that they'd known all along, but they return that gift by just adjusting the mirror and projecting the film onto the building across the square. It is just all
the local villagers all come out in the square to watch it being projected,
and they sit the way that's shot, the way that everybody stands in a perfect square as if they're in a theater, right? They all line up perfectly. It is visually, it's just incredibly touching.
And then Toto turns around to sit with a big grin on his face to Alfredo to say, "That's brilliant, Alfredo." And because we've got to also mention how amazing the young Toto is in the film. I mean, I can't remember. Hang on, this is where you need to.
Salvatore Cassio? Yeah, Salvatore Cassio.
Yeah, he apparently he grew up. He lived very close to the actual village it was filmed in, and he was given the part because he looked so good. But he's just so brilliant playing all the roles as a child actor. You never really think this is a child actor doing these bits. It's all so natural. His look round and all his looks, everything is. I think that's another reason that the film's so successful, because he holds half of the film together so well, really, as the child Toto.
Yeah,
really.
Right.
It's good.
Like when he's trying to wink.
There's three people that play that role, of course, because there's the child, there's the successful film director, and then there's the sort of teenager.
And his story is largely the one with the love story where he meets the beautiful girl and that whole connection. And it was a very interesting. I'd kind of forgotten that element of the story about how, I mean, he's a typical boy growing up. He has this draw to this beautiful new girl in town and all of this sort of stuff. But I had forgotten how much of how important the element of what Alfredo already sees in Toto, that Toto doesn't recognize in himself. But he is the driving force that says, don't stay in this town. Blonde girls are always trouble. Like all of these different things that he keeps kind of pushing with Toto, because he kind of recognizes there's more to you. You have this drive. You need to get out of this town and pursue your passions. And I think that's such a key part of the story.
Don't be like me. Don't stay here in the cinema booth. Get out of this town. I don't want to see you anymore. And then, of course, towards the end of the film, you see him leaving the town on the train, and Alfredo's in the station, and with Toto's mother and his sister waving goodbye as the train pulls out, and then you've got the shot looking over Toto leaning out the window as he's leaving everybody behind. That's a great shot by itself. But yeah, he's the driving force. He was a sort of father replacement figure,
truly,
that pushed Toto into his success, really, which is another lovely story by itself, really. Which version did you see, the 155-minute version or the 173-minute version?
For our purposes here, I ended up watching the Blu-ray that I have, which is actually about the 2-hour version, which I think was the initial international cut that we first got released here in '88. And I thought when I had it, I was talking to Pete about this before we recorded. I thought I had bought it after they had released the extended like 3 hour director's cut. And so I thought that that was the version I had. So when I put it in, I was a little surprised that I only had the 2 hour version. But so I only watched the 2 hour, but I have seen the full 3 hour version. Yeah.
Well, and I think I've only seen the 2 hour version. I've never seen the director's cut. And so for me, and this is what I'm most curious about for you two, is I totally appreciate, getting Toto out of town, and I appreciate all of that. But the relationship of Toto and Elena, their relationship feels unfinished narratively. Like it just feels like an abandoned thread. And
Yeah.
I don't think they should have ended up together. I don't think any of that, but I feel like it's just like, oh, woof, dropped in the wind in the movie. And I recognize that something in the director's cut resolves some of those threads that I feel unrequited. And I'm curious how that hits you. Like, what is the complete movie for you?
Well, actually, if you watch the 155-minute version, the 2 hour version, and you can be bothered to watch the whole of the credits, funny enough, right at the end of the whole of the credits, because the credits play with little tiny 4 or 5 second clips of film through them. But the last two clips, one of those is a very young Elena looking round like that. And then it's a cut of Toto in a cafe. The next clip is a cut of Toto in a cafe doing a double take round like that, as if like he's just seen something. So that like actually hints to what the 173-minute version is like. That it's obviously he sees a young girl in town which looks like young Elena. He follows her in his car, goes to her house, sees her then come out with her father figure, which he recognises as a friend of his from his college days. And so he then finds the telephone number, phones up the telephone number of the house, gets through and speaks to the Elena herself on the phone and says, "Look, hi, it's Toto here." And they meet up that evening. And she sort of basically says that I have a life here now. I can't sort of abandon it and everything, but I did always love you. And it was Alfredo that told me to leave. And if I loved you, not to contact you again, because you have a destiny more than any of us.
Huh.
And I also recall like the bit where she did say, and I did leave but I couldn't help but not leave my address for you, and I left it written on a piece of paper at the theater, which I guess you never saw. And then he goes back and he does actually find it
in that mess of a projection booth.
It's a really, I mean, it is a beautiful end to kind of the love story. We do get a sense of closure there. And I do really like that version. But after rewatching this one, I find that the way that she just doesn't end up showing up in that last part ends up working quite well for him, for his story, to almost like he learns a lesson like, I do need to just listen to kind of Alfredo and move on with my life and not be stuck on something like this. And so I still think that it works really well in the version that exists, or the shorter version.
Oh, I think the 150. I mean, I just can't. I'm not sure which version I prefer. Actually, I think in some ways I do prefer the 2 hour version, because if you play it right the way through to the end of the credits, the double take could lead on to anything really. It could lead on to he's seen something that he's really likes, or he's seen Elena again, and that maybe something is going to happen between them. Whereas in some ways the longer version, the 3 hour version, is, I find it a bit sad really that he doesn't really get together with her. You sort of want him to, really, don't you? Really?
Yeah, maybe that makes it worse, right? that's like punctuation on the reason why they chose to cut that entire sequence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to ask. You said, as we just started this conversation, you said the fire sequence. This is our effects sequence, right? Was not particularly good. I need to have you weigh in.
Not very good.
Why is it not good? What are you looking at?
I think it just needed more proper flames coming out of the building, whereas it's done with just smoke, and they tried to do it with some rather crude lights at the back flickering, which was very poor. It let it down badly. Funny enough, the internal fire sequence where Toto is trying to rescue Alfredo and they're shooting through flames and smoke. That's actually not bad. All that works quite well. But the wider sequences in the village square with the flames flickering, or the supposed burning of the flames in the wide shot of the theatre, of the cinema theatre, it just looks terrible. They let themselves down badly there, really.
Sure, yeah.
So,
toward the end of the film, as he's come back, they actually demolish the theater.
yeah.
In a scene like this, obviously you can just hire a demolition team to kind of knock a building down. But I mean, I'm assuming that the special effects team is still involved in part, kind of keeping it safe and everything, right?
I think that may have been a large model, actually. I've played it a couple of times and need to play it again. But when I last played it, I sort of came to the conclusion it might be a large model that was used.
Gotcha.
Really. So they actually, I didn't get the impression that they demolished an actual building in the town square.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of like foreground sort of explosions coming up to start the thing going, which look a little bit silly. But then once the dust cloud sort of develops, it sort of, you then see the building behind suddenly disappear in a separate shot, which is where I think it then cuts to a model shot.
Yeah,
really.
Right.
So the model shot's very good, but the initial sort of starting of the explosion's not particularly good. I mean, it probably would have been, to do it properly, it would have meant building a full-size theatre sort of frontage on a lot somewhere, with matching the surrounding buildings and demolishing that or blowing that up for real. I mean, cutting out the bottom section and letting it drop on itself. So, which I get probably wasn't possible in the actual square they filmed in, because they filmed in an original medieval square in an Italian village in Sicily, which is the actual village where the director grew up as well.
Right. Yeah, I remember reading about that he, like, it was his hometown that they did all this in, which I thought was kind of cool.
He wrote the story as well.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, Tornatore is an interesting director. I've only seen, I have not seen a lot of his films. I think I've only seen this one and then The Star Maker, which came out a few years later, but has not been a filmmaker I've seen a lot of his works. I miss like The Legend of 1900 and Milena. I've heard some pretty good things about those. Have you seen many of his other films?
No, I haven't seen any of his other work. I mean, I think this sometimes it's like when you have a director who really believes in something close to their heart. I mean, it's probably based slightly on when he was younger himself in that
It
town.
has that feeling for sure, yeah.
With the local cinema and his love of it all. And sometimes you get the best stories when they're written from the heart, don't you, really? And close to home.
Watching this again, I couldn't help but find a kind of a parallel with The Fabelmans, just in the sense of a young kid drawn to cinema and the idea of, what was up on that big screen and what you could do with it and everything. And I thought that was kind of an interesting little comparison of like this young kid who grows up to kind of become a filmmaker. And maybe that's why it feels a little biographical. I'm not exactly sure how much biographical details from Tornatore's own life are in here, but
there's some great images though, isn't there? That the projector projects out, doesn't just project out of a hole in the wall. It projects out through a giant, great lion mask.
Yeah, roaring
lion mask, which is interesting concept by itself, really. It's like this great statement on the wall, and here comes the film. It's coming out for you. The lion is sort of spitting it out across the screen.
I always wish that more movie theaters would do that and incorporate something really interesting, like a lion's roaring mouth over where their projection, where they're projecting from.
Some sort of gargoyle.
Yeah, right.
And then, because the whole village comes together in the cinema to watch these films, you've got the rich people above in the gallery, and then the poor people below, and all the young kids, and the whole village is playing out there. Really,
and we get to watch it play out over time. I mean, it's kind of, as the war is progressing, and so you're seeing some interesting elements of, soldiers off at war. You have one family who's kind of looked down upon because as they say, he's the communist or whatever. You have a love story that develops between a couple people in the theater. I like that in the back, during different periods, there's actually a prostitute who works in a back room back there.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like a wide variety of characters that we meet through just watching them. And this is one of those stories that gives you a real sense of the community over time. with like we're just getting to know these people, and we spend time with them and really are drawn to their love of the stories that they're watching up on the big screen, whether it's romantic or whether they're all crying,
Yeah,
or the big actions.
sometimes, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Or always fun when they're all like booing or something. Like there's plenty of those too.
And of course, when the cinema burns down, it just so happens that one of the local guys in the village has won the lottery.
Right.
So he decides to spend his money on rebuilding the cinema. So he then becomes the big cinema boss.
And it's a beautiful cinema. Right?
Yeah,
he does great.
Before he was just an ordinary person in the village, and now he's important. He runs the cinema where everybody comes to.
Especially because he's the one who got to make the choice. We're gonna not cut the kisses out anymore.
Yeah.
And just like the reaction when the people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe what I'm seeing.
I'm finally seeing a kiss."
Kiss on the screen, and everybody is like, all the boys are kissing with their mouths open.
Right. And that old lady is like, "Oh my God." Yeah. No, it's very fun to watch.
Well, and what a wonderful, again, the nostalgia trip about the mechanics of film presentation when they have to exchange reels back and forth by bike as the movies are playing between two theaters.
I must say, I do miss sort of not having film cameras on jobs any longer. I used to, even though I didn't work in the camera team, I used to love seeing the reels being changed and then reloading the magazines in the bags, and it was that whole process of it all, really. And the clapperboard, we still use the clapperboards, but and then it just had more of a real meaning then each take, because the film was rolling through.
It was so deliberate.
You cut the cameras, shoot something, and then at the end of the day, they take the memory cards out and download them in a van somewhere, and somebody sits there for 3 hours while they download everything. So it's not quite the same really any longer.
Not really.
Yeah, it feels like the stakes were higher.
Yeah, backing up the negatives and sending them off the runner into the film processing labs.
We also get the kind of the evolving history of film, which, some people may not know too much about, but the idea that in the early days of film, it was like a silver nitrate, and it was very flammable. It was incredibly flammable, and you had to be super careful. And we kind of get that evolution shown in the film, because there's that part where he's holding up a strip of film with a flame under it, trying to show Alfredo, look.
Yeah, they couldn't believe it, and people couldn't believe it wasn't flammable anymore.
Yeah.
And because Alfredo is sort of wishing that had been around when he had his accident.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Because it's ironic that really the village projectionist becomes blind and can't see anything that he's projecting anymore. In fact, in the 3-hour version, when Elena goes up to see Alfredo in the booth, Alfredo's sitting there at the projector with the film playing and just going through, and she's talking to him, and that's when he's telling her, leave Toto by himself. He has destiny, and Alfredo can't even see the film. He's just sitting there listening to the film run through the projector. Which is a sad image, really.
It is, but I liked the way that it's almost like this hint of like this magical realism that they play with him at some points, like when he's sitting there, and this is after he's already blind, but he's just like, the film's out of focus. And of course it was. It's like, okay. And Toto's like, how did you know? What's going on?
Yeah.
Very fun.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love letter.
It really is a love letter to film. And I think that's one of the things that I think has just connected people to it for such a long time. And it's not just a film. It's just about, like, his message at the end, like, make sure whatever you end up doing that you love it. And I think that is such a great message. And again, not just for people who are working in the film industry, but whatever it is you're doing, like, find that passion in your life and stick with it. You're never going to be bored. You'll always be happy.
And always be fulfilled as well. And fulfillment doesn't always come with money, although it is quite useful to have it sometimes.
A useful tool.
Can't help.
I'm not going to turn it down. But actually, I go and do a few talks in schools here and there, if I manage to find the time. And that's some of the things I say when people are asking me about the business, what I love about the business. And it's just like that fulfillment of actually making something. I feel I'm making something that certainly with some of the stuff I've done, hopefully will be seen in 100 years' time still. People will still be looking back at it, really. If you look at a lot of films, some of them, films like Ben-Hur, which is I'm not sure how old that is now. It must be coming up for 75
Yeah,
years.
it's 50,
it's amazing.
59,
I mean, still a good watch, yeah. I mean, it's still...
Yeah, and again, just how big, especially like those Cecil B. DeMille films, just so big. I mean, it's just really impressive, so...
Andy, we love this movie. How did it do at award season? Did everybody else love it as much as we did?
It was a much beloved film, 25 wins with 32 other nominations. And you have to remember at the time, like this was the short version of the movie. So people loved it just as much as they ended up loving the longer versions later. At the Oscars, this film won Best Foreign Language Film. At the David Di Donatello Awards, which is Italy's, essentially their Oscars, Tornatore was nominated for Best Director, but lost to Armando Olmi for The Legend of the Holy Drinker, which sounds like a great film. I need to see that one. It was nominated for Best Film, but also lost to The Legend of the Holy Drinker. Ennio Morricone's score won Best Music. It was nominated for Best Producer, but lost to Filiberto Bandini for Caro Gorbachev. And Pupella Maggio was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but lost to Athena Cenci in Compagni di Scuola.
Well, all right. Those are some sad losses at the Donatello Awards.
Well, it just makes me... I really need to find The Legend of the Holy Drinker now.
The Legend of the Holy Drinker. I feel like that's the one that's gonna... That's like the key that's going to unlock a lot of things for us in movies.
Exactly.
Is that we have to see that movie. How to do at the box office? To make any money, this little tiny baby film?
Well, Tornatore had a relatively small budget for this lengthy film. I'm not sure what it was in Italian currency at the time, but it translates to $5 million or $12.85 million in today's dollars. The movie opened November 17th, 1988 in Italy, and actually was received poorly at the box office, so Tornatore cut the film down to just over 2 hours for the international release, which was received well, as we just said. The film won the Special Jury Prize at Cannes in 1989 before opening limited February 2nd, 1990 here in the States. It maxed out at 124 screens its 13th week and did relatively well its theatrical run, going on to earn $12.4 million domestically and $3.4 million internationally, for a total gross of $40.5 million in today's dollars. That includes its director's cut re-release, it seems, but it just goes to show that it does have a draw for audiences. With such a long running time, though, the film lands with an adjusted profit per finished minute of just $160,000. Still, a success overall.
I just found on Giuseppe Tornatore's page, he directed a documentary on Ennio Morricone, and I can't find any place to watch it. It feels like a thing that I need to have in my life.
It took me ages to find the 3-hour version of the film. It's not very easy to find some of this stuff, really.
Hard to track down some of these.
Yeah. Frustrating.
It's like a treasure hunt by itself.
Yeah, right.
At the end, it's like, I found it. Yes.
Right, exactly.
It's it. Yeah.
He did end up, Tornatore did work with Morricone until Morricone passed away, but Ennio Morricone, I mean, we've already talked about how great his music is, but just stunning. And then this was perhaps the only one that I've noted where his son actually comes in and does one of the themes, which I was like, oh, that's actually kind of interesting. And I haven't followed his son to see if he kind of continued in the composing world, but the music here is just... It's just top notch.
If you took the film by itself, it's a terrific film anyway. And then with one of the best film scores ever overlaid over the whole top of it, it's like, yeah. That's why I think it makes it such a special film, really.
Truly. Well, Chris, I mean, this has been such a fantastic conversation about your career and everything, and this fantastic film. Yeah, thank you so much. Do you have a place online where we should direct people to go check out and see what you're up to? I mean, I know they can look at your website to kind of check out your reel and everything.
Sometimes I'm a bit wary because otherwise I just get so much post. I used to advertise a lot, and I've actually my website is actually quite out of date now because I haven't bothered updating it, to be perfectly honest, because I don't need to because I get the work anyway. And all I found was that I just get so much post, I just can't cope with it all. I mean, I'm busy enough with the job without answering people's questions all the time. Because one of the things that I probably in the UK that I was most famous for a while was a thing called Robot Wars. I don't know if you've ever seen.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it started in the US, and then it was the format was taken to the UK by a producer, and it was basically these little. I think you guys know it as battle bots.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
In the UK, it became a thing called Robot Wars, and they had their own house robots in Robot Wars. So in the UK version, so they all had their own personalities, and there were like 5 or 6 of them, I designed them, and I had a team that built them, and they literally became personalities, and they were famous by themselves. They were people. It was like people. They were on T-shirts, on bedspreads, on socks, boys' socks and slippers and shoes. They were on cornflake packets. They were on everything, and I would be interviewed like on daytime TV, and get recognised in supermarkets and things. And so I had about 2 years of mini fame. And, when that died, that's obviously all past now, because it's now coming up to 20 years since the last bit of it's made. But
I remember now. I have it, and it was this, because this was Clarkson was a presenter on this show, right?
Clarkson was the very first presenter, the very first series.
Yep.
But it became super famous in the second series onwards.
Yeah.
And the robots, like especially Kill-A-Lot, it literally became a household name.
That is so funny.
I'd go into pubs and be sitting in pubs with friends, and I'd hear people sitting on tables next door discussing what robots they were going to build, and I'd get those house robots, and I'd be sitting there thinking, God, it was an amazing thing, because what I liked about it most of all was it actually encouraged young people to be interested in engineering.
Sure.
It made engineering cool, is what it did, which has always been one of my big sort of bugbears, and trying to encourage people to of all sexes to get involved in that type of thing. And it did a really good job for the 6 series it's ran for.
Fantastic.
Well, obviously there's still some thread of that, because there are still like robotics clubs and all that sort of thing in schools.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's still a
and
draw.
BattleBots in the States, I understand, is doing really well, but they don't have their own house robots anymore. The reason we had them in the first series was because most of the contestants' robots were absolutely useless, and we'd have had no show.
There was no competition.
We'd have had no show at all if we hadn't have had the house robots. These house robots could move around. Some of the contestants' robots were so bad that we had to pull them on fishing line to make them look as if they were doing something.
Oh my God!
Across, and the other robot would go slamming into them, and at least you can then you can have a bit of a, like with one robot pushing the other one around, you'd feel that something was actually happening.
Yeah, right.
Oh, funny.
So it was dreadful in the first series. The Clarkson series was dreadful. It wasn't Clarkson's fault. It was just that people just weren't up to building 100-kilo robots that could drive around and slam axes into somebody else. So.
Well, he needed to be busy blowing up cars, so that was he had other things going on.
So funny.
Yeah,
so funny.
Yeah, we progressed from there. So,
oh my gosh.
It's almost like the world now, but funny.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Chris, thank you again so much for joining us here. We really, really appreciate it.
No, good to see you. And
it's a real treat.
Yeah, stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone else out there, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you liked the show, and certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. The music is Chonk Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we certainly appreciate it if you could drop one in there for us. See you next time. It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great conversations over the years about so many great movies. All that said, producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes.
Becoming a Next Reel member gives you access to all sorts of additional and exclusive content. Plus, you're helping us keep the lights on. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership, where you can learn more about becoming a member, which costs a measly $5 a month, practically the same as one fancy coffee drink. And you get so much more.
Every month, we record a bonus episode exclusively for members. Those episodes cover movies from whatever series we're covering at the moment, or add to previous series.
Some movies we've covered that only members get to hear us discuss include The Blues Brothers,
The Russia House,
Naked Lunch,
Independence Day,
The Hot Rock,
and Relic, the better one. Plus, members get to vote on what we're going to discuss for those episodes.
We also record additional pre- and post-show content in regular episodes that only members get to hear.
Like conversations about similarly themed movies.
And answering listener questions from our live member chat.
Speaking of our live member chat, we record almost all of our episodes in Discord, where members can chat right along with us live.
Members get access to other members-only channels in our Discord community as well. On top of all that, members get all episodes a full week earlier than everyone else in a private Next Reel feed just for them that includes all the shows in the Next Reel family. The Next Reel, the film board,
movies we like, Sitting in the Dark, and more new projects on the way.
To top it all off, members don't have to listen to ads. We've already eliminated those annoying, dynamically inserted ads that, let's face it, we all hated.
We are listening to you.
We love podcasting for a living, and those ads help to pay the bills. Now, we're counting on you, dear listener.
We promise we aren't going back to those terrible, dynamically inserted ads that don't relate to us at all. All we ask is that you consider supporting the Next Reel family of podcasts with a membership.
Again, it's $5 per month or $55 per year. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership.
thenextreel.com/membership. Get your access to early, ad-free episodes with bonus content, member bonus episodes, and access to member channels and live streams in Discord by signing up today.